Hello, I'm Kai Rosga, and welcome to Version Up, one lawyer's journey to digitally transform his legal practice. What does it look like when the frontier labs go legal vertical? We're about to find out. For months, there's been speculation about whether, how, and when the frontier labs like OpenAI and Anthropic would target lawyers by offering them the same core AI features that are being supplied by the various legal tech vendors that have built their legal tools on top of the LLMs. Last week, we got some more clues, with Claude making another big move into the legal vertical and Copilot starting to scoot in as well. What does it all mean for users, the legal tech vendors, and the investors who back them? That's what I explore with today's guest, Horace Wu. Horace is a former lawyer who recently founded Syntheia, which turns transactional documents into structured data that AI tools can understand. The result is better and more efficient outcomes when using AI for legal contracting workflows. Before we get into discussing the data layer, Horace and I talk about the intelligence layer, the LLMs themselves, and spitball what it means for the legal market as the frontier labs expand into the legal vertical. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hi, Horace. Welcome to Version Up.
Hello, Kaj. It's good to talk to you. How are you?
I'm great. Happy Friday. And like any other Friday, there's enough developments to talk about that could fill 3 hours, but we're going to try to do it much quicker than that.
Absolutely.
And I would love to get your perspective first on a few developments that have been happening recently. And really, I feel like this last week have accelerated, which is the constant anxiety, speculation, mystery around, are the frontier labs going to push into the legal vertical in a way that puts them more head to head with what some of these vendors that we use are offering? And so on that front, we had the Claude word plugin development.
That was a big one.
Yep. And then we had Copilot coming out and changing some of its subscription options and really signaling that they too want to really have legal users come to them for some of the more basic functionality and features in the AI tool space. So are you reading these developments the same way? What is your view or take on where we are right now with the frontier labs?
I am reading these announcements in the same way everybody's reading these announcements. And you read them with uncertainty, you read them with anticipation. And honestly, I don't think anybody knows exactly what's happening. What I think is the frontier labs and the tech giant see an opportunity here to make money, whether it is by taking a slice of the software spend or more likely going directly after the legal services spend and taking that $1 trillion pie, or at least a slice of that. So someone said to me this week, yes, Claude is a threat to the likes of Spellbook and Harvey and everyone else who's got a word ad in, but they're actually a greater threat to law firms who are trying to pitch to their clients, and their clients saying, you know what, actually, I got the answer off Claude. I don't need to come to you in the first place. I think that's where the threat is. And that might be something that people gloss over initially because they see Microsoft and they see Claude and they think it's a software play. But I suspect it's a broader play than that.
So that's interesting because client insourcing is the word that comes to mind when we're talking about that. And let me run this by you. I feel like often these developments happen and then we always go back to talking about wrappers. I don't know what that means anymore. I don't know if anyone knows what that means anymore. But, are vendors building on top of LLMs in a way that really adds a tremendous amount of value, or are they packaging something that the underlying model is going to offer directly? And what I often find is the vendors are very good at, for lack of a better word, explaining away. And I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of vendors, to be clear, but I observe that, people who offer AI products often have a very good explanation for why whatever development of the week is not an issue and not a risk.
Right. We're different.
And so,
don't worry about it. Keep spending money on us instead. Yeah.
Well,
that's spiel.
I wasn't going to say it, but I'm glad.
Oh, I can.
But what I love about what you said is it's like, the vendor is saying, oh, no, the person really has to worry is law firms because of client insourcing. But to me, it's all sort of the same thing. If we're talking about routine legal work,
Yep.
whether a client insources that with AI, whether a vendor offers it with a product, or whether Claude makes that possible through their out-of-the-box product, to me, it's
Yep.
sort of all the same thing. Am I wrong about that?
To expand on that, what do you mean by all the same thing? Are you saying that there is a need that gets met and therefore it doesn't matter what meets that ultimate need? The
Yes.
consumer no longer needs it. Okay, got it. So yeah, well, see, this is where the market is so fragmented for legal services. There's not one legal services market. There's not one kind of market where, your lawyer at Wachtell is not the same lawyer who lives on, corner of somewhere in New Jersey, right? They are not offering the same service. They're not going after the same clients, and therefore the person who they're trying to target will get their needs met in different ways. So I don't think there's like one kind of answer. However, I do think that what's happening is AI is chipping away at the bottom and getting higher and higher in that sort of needs pyramid. And ultimately what that means is either lawyers can have to build a bigger pyramid so they can continue reaping that rent at the top, or they simply lose part of that and they're going to have to figure out what else they can do with their time. So yes, AI is chipping away, but it's chipping away in a multi-dimensional way. It's not just as simple as, oh, someone's going to satisfy that need, because it's just different for everybody.
Completely agree with that. And to me, it does come down to what is the nature of the work that a solution can solve. And at the sort of most low value level, things are getting extremely commoditized. And I don't think that's surprising to anyone. But perhaps what's surprising is that Claude, which in some ways you could imagine Anthropic pursuing a path where they want third parties to extract value on top of the Claude LLM, and that by giving them sort of a free space, almost like downstream of the model. But that by more clearly looking to monetize that space, they are potentially signaling a different thought about what their long-term business model is. Meaning, are they just a frontier lab offering an LLM, or are they going to start slowly climbing up this, you call it pyramid, maybe it's a ladder, but slowly climbing up this ladder where it's no longer just a novelty. You can get some basic legal answers. It's really designed in a way where lawyers might actually turn to it for answers.
I think that's one possible path. And you say slowly, I say rapidly. The other thing they could be doing is that they could be turning themselves into a marketplace where, with the growth of MCP servers and different people offering data plugins into Claude, you can imagine a universe where everyone gets a subscription to Claude in the same way you might have a subscription to Spotify. And then when you need to have someone or something plug extra data into the language model, they can just go, oh, here's an MCP server where I can draw on the case laws in the state of Connecticut that allows me to answer this question about parking tickets. And that is an extra subscription or a pay-per-use. And Claude in the middle takes a 30% clip. Like, that's another business model that can arise out of the greater adoption of Claude by the consumer class. So there's a lot of different directions it can go at the moment. But right now, I think Claude is threatening everybody. It's threatening Harvey in the sense like it can essentially do most of what Harvey does. Probably not to the same degree of accuracy, certainly not to the same degree of convenience. It's threatening the suburban lawyer who may not be getting the same call rate as they used to get because people simply don't need legal help from a person when they can get satisfied from a machine. And it's threatening, all these other sort of like tangential things that touch on the legal sector. So yes, it's completely turning the market upside down in a way that I don't think anyone expected 4 years ago. We expected some impact. We expected like the wrapper market, as we use that term, would be dominated and killed off because either Microsoft or Anthropic or ChatGPT would come to win, and it looks like it's going to be Anthropic. And Now it's like, well, hang on, it's more than just rappers. It could be a lot more than just rappers. So
Mm.
the gravity of this, we haven't quite figured out yet, but it is certainly coming for everybody. There are only so many dollars that get spent on legal needs. And it's not like suddenly people are going to have 100x more legal needs. That's the pie we've got. So who gets a bigger slice is the battle that's going on at the moment.
I find the marketplace explanation very compelling. I share this view strongly that this seems to be the obvious path that an LLM provider would go to monetize maximally what they're offering in the market. So let's go back now 3 months.
The
Which
3
is
months. What
so
exactly is
long
3
ago,
months?
right?
Yes.
Can you bring into this plugins, skills?
Yep.
Can you bring that into the discussion of this idea of Claude as being a place that offers a ecosystem for people to essentially create, distribute, and others to acquire legal apps?
Okay, so we're going to exercise our imaginations here a little bit because I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think all the elements are here. So go back 3 months when Claude 4.6 came out. There was a step shift where everyone suddenly went, hang on a sec, 4.6 is a lot more competent at a lot more things than we had anticipated. And it was not just more competent, it was more consistent and it was more capable at things that it just something changed. And it wasn't quite clear exactly what changed. It just was able to do more things better. And what that suddenly allowed people to do was to go, okay, well, I'm going to start experimenting with a lot more things. Around the same time, Anthropic released skills. Well, they didn't release skills so much as they always had skills, and they kind of now allow people to build on top of it. And skills really just is a Word file essentially, or text file that the model can call, which then kind of frame them in with sort of tools or with a sort of mentality. It used to be kind of in the realm of system prompting, but then, you divvy that up, you start splitting the hairs. You've got the system prompts, you've got the skills, you've got the context. All of that essentially kind of goes into a chat window for the language model to then interpret, work on, and kind of predict the next string of text. So skills is kind of one bundle of, I suppose, like additional capabilities that the model can then use to frame how it answers. And at the same time, or even before that, MCP came out and other sort of ways to like bring additional words into the context window. That then allowed the models to retrieve information as part of the context to then generate things that are more reliable and more grounded. So all of this kind of all culminated in this turning point, this kind of inflection point 3 or 4 months ago, where a lot more people started building on top of Claude. So January 2026, the conversations shifted at law firms, at in-house teams, at vendors, because everyone who was somewhat of a doubter suddenly had to change their views. And what it meant was there was this kind of, at the same time, shift in the conversation around not simply using generative AI as a chatbot or as part of a workflow, because you can use generative AI multiple times in a workflow, sort of multi-step to solve a problem, but also using it for this agentic sort of thing where they get to make their own decisions. They get to have autonomy. They get to decide what tools to call, what skills to use, etc. And so, yeah, all of that kind of happened around January, and it's been growing ever since then. And yesterday, the day before we started recording this, Claude 4.7 came out. And so all of this is happening in rapid succession. And like, we, the builders, are looking at this market going, holy crap, we cannot build fast enough with the model and the intelligence that's improving literally month on month on month. So I don't know if that answers your question, because I think I start waffling a lot, but I think that gives you a painting of the landscape, if you like.
Well, it does. And it makes me wonder, where does that leave? Let's take a legal tech vendor that is offering a solution that supports a lawyer in their practice, their day-to-day practice.
We can give a name to this hypothetical company and call it Hagora.
Hagora, I like it. It's Hagora, and it's the 17 other vendors that I was browsing at Legal Week that claimed to have similar features and didn't test them. But, we have a lot of products out there that help lawyers in their practice or daily practice. And
Yes.
they have probably a core set of features we could all list at this point. They all are adding the ability to generate workflow automations that are, a little more customizable for the user, et cetera. Where does that leave those vendors? Because I'm trying to imagine I'm working at a 1,000-lawyer law firm, and there's a small technical team that has been tasked with building internally the things that our lawyers need at this law firm. And let's pretend the law firm hasn't yet signed up for one of these subscriptions. At this point, how feasible is it becoming for that my small technical team with, a decent but not huge budget can really kind of spin up all these things using a Claude-based ecosystem?
I think it's highly feasible, and it's getting easier week on week. Like, it is in Claude's interest to make it easy for people to build on top of their LLM, because they can directly reap the profits then. Now, there's a lot of different ideas and business models that kind of overlap in this. And I think the answer to your question, and I'm going to answer the underlying question of what is the future for the Agoras of the world, it comes down to two words, and the two words are good enough. Like, what is good enough for that user? And this is where there's a huge variation in the needs of the user. For a top-tier law firm, good enough may require someone to build foolproof, verified, checked sort of workflows that plug into real data, which is an entirely automated, because the lawyer doesn't want to go and do their own search and retrieval. So this is where, like, the Agoras of the world have an absolute better fit than a Claude, because they're going to be the ones taking care of all the engineering so that the lawyer doesn't have to think about it, so that the right information is retrieved, so that the workflows can be constructed for the lawyers without them spending their time. But then for a solo practitioner, for an in-house team, for someone else, somewhere in the kind of mid-tier level, that question changes. Or maybe Agora doesn't have an existing plugin to a piece of software. And in that case, maybe it is better to build something yourself, because if you don't have a plugin anyway and you have to do manual labor of dragging, dropping, and all the rest, maybe you just use Claude and get pretty much the same quality of answer, because the underlying intelligence is almost identical, and not spend the extra money. So it comes down to the answer of, the criteria of what is good enough for that particular lawyer, for their particular use case.
And as these legal tech vendors move more into what you're describing, where they are almost like morphing into a consultant of type, right? And offering services. And by the way, they're doing this inside corporate legal departments, not just law firms. At some point, you sort of imagine this arrow flowing from SaaS / product to consultant / service to ... law firm.
Possibly. I mean, this is where
not literally a law firm, but something that looks and feels and sounds kind of like one.
Well, why not literally a law firm? I mean, that's what the Arizona laws allow. You can have a Harvey Inc. if you wanted to. Now, I think it will be silly for Harvey to do that, because they'll lose the entire law firm customer base they've got. But there's nothing structurally stopping them from offering legal services. I think where they stand, they're better not to do that. But for a different legal tech company who can go and tackle the entire vertical of legal services and software and everything else, why not?
How about Microsoft? The other development this week had to do with Copilot.
Yep.
Microsoft has, its own baggage and its own huge advantages, right? That come from its enterprise suite.
Yep.
And the fact that it is, the default enterprise solution for most law firms and, most legal departments of large, Global 500 companies, let's say. So they're differently positioned, right? Different weaknesses, different strengths. How do you
Yep.
think about them as compared to this discussion we've had about Claude?
I see a lot of parallels with what Microsoft is doing now to what they did with Teams and Slack. And by the way, the moment I finish speaking, Microsoft is going to blacklist me and never hire me ever again. But like what they did with Teams and Slack, Slack had a much better product that was growing extremely quickly. Microsoft created a mediocre product that was distributed everywhere. And for most people, it became the good enough default with great security. And I feel like that's where Copilot is going, where you get this kind of like mediocre intelligence that's not really good at anything, but it's secure and it's going to be distributed everywhere for a very, very low fee. So then it gets adopted by people who can't be bothered adding anything else or don't want to go through that transformation cost. So I think Microsoft's strategy is we don't need to build the best thing. We just need to build something that fits and people will just use it because it's not expensive and it's halfway mediocre / competent.
Yeah, I mean, you're framing around what is good enough. Yeah, I often think of it as sort of the tools that allow you to keep up, that bring you up to a baseline. To those who are thinking about it that way, to let's say law firm leadership that is thinking about these tools in that way, my message would be that that is a deeply flawed framing for what AI is. And I probably will struggle to give you a very good explanation for why that's the case, but it feels to me like treating Copilot like you would Teams is a potential trap for law firms because Teams was something that made us more efficient as a productivity tool. AI really offers the ability to empower your clients or your competitors, other law firms, or new upstarts, right? Legal tech vendors. It empowers them to actually go out and offer the same services that you as a law firm offer. It risks eating at a significant core of the work that law firms have been depending on to form that pyramid. Did you agree with that kind of thinking that that good enough approach is they're going to think, okay, I did what I need to do. I went and bought the product I need to buy. I checked this box off. Okay, good. I can go to sleep now, right? I think the answer is no. I think if you do only that, I think you're going to wake up with a bigger problem than a year or two from now.
I 100% agree with that. And I'm going to paint an example for you, which I was actually chatting to one of my team members about earlier this week. It's like right now, or rather, let's imagine back in 2020, before generative AI really took off and all that rest of stuff. And imagine we are cowboys in the Western frontier and we're riding horses, and horses is our primary means of production, right? Horsepower. How much horsepower do you have? And therefore, how much can you get done? Now, all of a sudden, someone's produced a steam engine. And everyone's like, oh, hang on a sec. What? This is a completely different way of enhancing production. And now we're in the industrial age. So a law firm who has had, say, 1,000 horses, now they're going, well, do I just buy one steam engine and replace my 1,000 horses? It's like, well, I don't think it's an equivalent. You can't really do that. And then the small law firm who's got also the same access to a steam engine, but maybe they rent it for 2 hours a week instead of owning a steam engine outright, they can do a lot with that steam engine. And they never had a horse to start with, or they only had one horse to start with. So I think this is sort of the mentality that people have right now, where they're like, maybe I can just sub in my steam engine and replace my 1,000 horses. Like, no, that's a false equivalence. That just, you have this will never work. And I think this is the trap that a lot of larger law firms and organizations fall into. And they go, oh, now I've got a steam engine. It's giving me more horsepower. Yeah, but it's not a horse.
The psychology of this is so critical for anyone trying to understand why are lawyers not quicker to use this technology, or why are law firms struggling to see the threat and the opportunity from AI. I think the psychology is so informative because you have to understand that lawyers practicing at law firms have had a lot of technology come their way. And every single time a new technology has come along, it's made things more productive. The cost of being slow to adopt it was not terribly high. The opportunity cost was not terribly high. And eventually you would catch up and everyone would reach a new baseline and then everything would be great. And I think that there's just a bias that was created over those many, many decades of that experience into thinking that any technology comes along, you wait and see, and then you always can catch up. And I think that AI feels very different and that being treated in that same way, but that fails to recognize both the tremendous threat and the significant opportunity it presents to those who adopt it now, as opposed to waiting and seeing.
Right. It's completely changed the landscape. And so, like, in a way, I empathize with, the large law firms and the organizations who are the incumbents and the leaders. What can they do? The whole playing field is shifted. So they don't have any innate advantage from their previous position. They're in the same boat as anyone else who has to adopt AI, and perhaps they're in a more difficult position because they have to be willing to cut and change how they operate in order to take advantage of AI. Whereas a new startup, a new player, they don't have any of that legacy stuff. They don't have any of the constraints that exist.
Totally. And it's a completely reasonable, understandable conclusion to reach based on their priors that things will change incrementally. And you could put yourself in the position of a corporate law firm and look at the record profits and the record revenues and the record fee levels that are just happening right now, that those new highs have all been achieved in the last year, and understand that the reaction to that might be, well, okay, like how could we be about to fall off a cliff, right? If that's the state of the situation, this is going to be incremental. We're going to have time. And maybe they will have more time than some people predict, but I think they're going to have less time than they expect.
I think it's ultimately about human transformation. I think the machines have progressed faster than humans are capable of adapting to the change. And so now it's a matter of how do we get humans to change behavior and transform to catch up to the state of reality that the machines have now presented us. And this is where the winners will be doing something far more drastic than letting people slowly get comfortable and not get feelings hurt.
That's really well put. The other part of this, which I would love to explore with you, is we've been talking about the AI tools that are built on top of all that data and information that an enterprise has, right? AI is meant to extract value from that data and information and help a lawyer provide legal advice to their client. Underpinning all that is the data itself. And I have this feeling that this is tremendously overlooked and that this is a layer of this whole AI infrastructure that we need to explore and think more carefully about. Can you tell us what is Syntheia and how does it fit into this AI infrastructure that we've been talking about?
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. I'm going to paint the picture again. I keep using the phrase paint the picture, which, by the way, it's not a phrase I use a lot, but I've used it like 3 times already in this conversation. And here's how I kind of think about it. And when I talk to law firms and innovation leads,
but Horace, no one paints anymore. Everyone uses Canva. So if you want, you can use.
I think people now.
The logo. No.
I think people now just prompt for pictures. So let me prompt a picture for you. It's this kind of landscape now where people have essentially three kind of layers to their generative AI software. And I'm going to call the 3 layers your data layer, your intelligence layer, and your UI UX layer. Now, I know other people have different ways of breaking up the stack, but I like these 3 because it puts it into 3 very clean buckets. So, and the UI UX layer, the layer that lawyers and end users get to interface with, it's all about, well, how convenient is it? What is it, a chat bot? Is it a grid that people get to review in? Is it some other thing like an agent that you assign a task to? It does its thing and it comes back and gives you a result. What is that UI UX layer? And I think that's what's gotten like 95% of the attention and funding in the legal tech space. And when you do a really good job of that's great. Historically, that's how SaaS solutions have always won. The idea of product to market fit that VCs talk about all the time, most of that's focused on what's your UI UX, because that's the fit. And I think the battleground for that is still hot. It's still being fought over. It's not a 2-horse race. It's a very hotly contested area, especially with Anthropic coming into this field as well and offering their own Claude for Word. Then the layer below that is the intelligence layer, and that's a large language model. Now, different ways of slicing and dicing that, but essentially you've got Anthropic, you've got Gemini, and you've got ChatGPT. Those are your three frontier labs, models that are being used. You also can talk about some of the small language models that are deployed locally, but we're going to ignore that for the purposes of this conversation and say you've basically got three leaders and nobody in legal tech is touching that. Everybody is renting that capability to power their software. And then beneath all of that is the data layer. Now, this is a part that I think is way underinvested. So conventionally, what people are doing with the data layer is they're going, I'm going to have all my documents or all my information stored somewhere. And when I need it, I'm going to pull whatever it is through some search and retrieval device and then plugging that whole thing into my language model. Now, the problem with that, for those who build with language models, is you're constrained by the context window. These language models can only see the words that are put in for every single session. So you might know that if you start a conversation today and then you start a fresh conversation tomorrow, unless there's some memory linking the two chats, they're two independent chats where conversation one and conversation two have no linkage between each other. So you, the software builder or the user, have to decide what to put into the context in order for the intelligence to run over that information to then produce for you the output in the UI UX layer. So that's the flow from the data or whatever you put into the prompt to the context window. The intelligence can then work on that, and then it spits out the answer in some sort of interface. Now, the trouble with the data layer is, for the most part, people have assumed that, well, you just throw a whole document into a context window and it's going to figure out the answer because the model is getting smarter, the context window is getting larger, the models are getting cheaper. So there's no need to solve the data problem. And I think that's actually the wrong way of thinking about it for a lot of reasons that I'm not going to dive into right now. But essentially, if you give a model better context, more precise context with less noise, it will do better. And that's what Syntheia does. We are the sort of layer to refine the data, to structure it, to pull just the stuff that it needs and none of the noise, and then feeding that into the context so that the models can think about it in a more precise and relevant way before spitting out the answer into whatever user interface that lawyer or end user happens to be talking with. This is what we do. This is kind of our ethos and philosophy about what this stack looks like.
And how do you do it? What differentiates you from other providers that do something similar? Is your approach different? Is your technology different?
Yeah, so we kind of look at this landscape, and we focus purely on contracts and transactional documents because, I used to be a transactional lawyer and this is the only thing I know. Don't ask me about litigation. I'll, lead you astray. But for transactional stuff, the way we kind of think about it is you've essentially got three different technologies when it comes to search and retrieval, 3.5 depending on who you ask. And the three different technologies are: you can use text for retrieval, so keywords and the actual, what you find on the page. You can use vectors, so embeddings, representations of what the word means to do a search and retrieval. And you can use graph, the relationships between the different, whether it is words or concepts or nodes, and then you can use those to retrieve. And the fourth, or the 3.5, is you use metadata tags, but metadata tags tend to kind of be used in conjunction with everything. And they're not mutually exclusive techniques, but what we do that's a little bit different to everybody else is, rather than using just pure search and retrieval, which is, hey, I have a query, and the query maybe I'm looking for an indemnity clause in a share purchase agreement. Using the different search techniques, you can go, oh, I'm going to pull back anything that looks like an indemnity or has the word indemnity or is on a graph node for indemnity. But what we do is we very much focus on the words. We take every single document and we normalize them into a standardized index. And where we are a little bit different is we don't try to do the retrieval ourselves using, this kind of heuristic and hard-coded methodology. Instead, The index that our system creates is then put into a language model for it to reason through and decide in order to answer a specific question. What do you, language model that is intelligent, think you would need from this essentially table of content? And then once you decide what you need, that's what you pull back. So we're not saying in advance in our system, like, go find me anything that's similar, or go find me anything that contains the word indemnity. We're saying to the language model, look through this table of content for this agreement. Do you think it's an indemnity in there? If not, what would you like to pull back and see to answer that question? So this is where we're different. We let the language model do the thinking before answering.
So let me give you maybe a specific example or hypothetical.
Sure.
Let's say I have a corporate legal department and it's using Legora, got Copilot, and then Luminance, like a redlining tool.
Yep.
So those three tools just sort of run on top of the data layer that you've created, or is there some sort of interoperability or connectivity that has to happen between your tool and each of those three that I just listed?
Yeah, so there would have to be some connectivity. Like, Legora is not going to know to look in the Syntheia index to go and reason through a document and find it. They've got their own search and retrieval. Likewise for Luminance, although I don't think Luminance is purely a redlining tool, they're more kind of a review / everything else tool as well. But for something like a Copilot, we can plug into a Copilot via an MCP service or via an API, where we take the query, we interpret the query, and then on our side, we say, well, to answer that question, don't just look at clause 3. Look at clause 3, which also cross-references clause 7.2 and has the defined terms for what is an indemnity and what is a, indemnification event. And all of that gets pulled back rather than just letting the search and retrieval system decide. We're letting the language model decide. So does that they kind of color the way we try to fit into the ecosystem?
What if I just had like enterprise Claude? Same analogy. The analogy will be to Copilot again?
Yeah, exactly the same analogy. So by the way, I'm talking about a product that we haven't released yet. This is pre-release. We have this MCP service, which then, when you're on Claude, you can say, hey, I want to ask a question, and Syntheia would reason through that and then give you back the answer and the context. So this is pre-release. It's coming out hopefully in a month or two, but we do a lot more than just this one product. But that's the kind of the crux of our difference. The crux of our difference is we break the documents down and let the language model do what it's really good at, which is that prediction of what it needs to answer a question.
So if we could focus on the extraction product for a law firm, what setup is required to get up and running with this technology, and how long does it take, and how much involvement do you need to have after you complete the onboarding?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So for the extraction product, essentially, let's talk about the end game first. The end game is we want this to be completely invisible to the end user. If a lawyer has to exert extra effort to use our product, we have not succeeded. So what we are essentially doing is we're saying to the law firm, what are the documents, the precedents, the reference material that you want your law firm, or you want your lawyers to kind of be aware of and be able to reference when they're doing work like reviewing and drafting and whatever else they tend to do with the contracts, depending on the team, depending on, the workflow. So we kind of define all those things in advance and go, in order to help you do your work, we think we need documents 1 to 1,000. Let's get those and put them into Syntheia. Now, what Syntheia does is we automate the extraction process, we automate the labeling process, we automate the entire kind of creating that database for the lawyers. And at the point of use, whether it is Claude or Copilot or something else, lawyers can go directly to Syntheia to grab the data, but that's not invisible, so we prefer that they don't do that. Instead, what we want is for the law firm to integrate with our APIs so that when they use a system like Claude to ask a question, Claude will then go to our API/MCP, retrieve the right information back, which becomes the grounding context for it to answer the question. And if the lawyers go, I don't believe you, Claude, that's when they can click open the explanation and look inside Syntheia to see where the source information came from. But essentially, we want to eliminate our interference as much as possible with how lawyers work. We just want to be the data that powers how language models and lawyers complete the work they do.
That's fascinating. I mean, one of the other developments the last week or two that we didn't talk about also on the Claude front was the deprecation around token usage and people seeing the drop off in performance when they use co-work, they use Claude chat, et cetera. A lot of speculation around why that might be happening. I don't think we need to get into that, but would all that be a tailwind for what you're offering in the sense that it sounds like part of the benefit of your solution is also efficiency and perhaps a more efficient extraction and a less costly application or use of the LLM to get information out of that extracted data? Is that the right way to think about it as well? Like, as it becomes more expensive for me to use Claude chat, am I going to see some kind of savings from the fact that the data extraction was done more efficiently with Syntheia, for example?
Yeah, I think that's one of the ancillary benefits. So I would say there are two key benefits, right? Let's look at the cost side first. So if you throw an entire document into Claude to give you an answer, Claude has to read over every single word, which let's say it's, 150,000 words, 150,000 tokens. That's a lot of tokens to burn through before it's even able to go, what is the possible answer? Using Syntheia's tool, which extracts the text and structures it deterministically without using a language model, they only need to run through maybe 12,000, 15,000, so 1/10 of the tokens to go through the index and decide what's just the relevant parts to answer the question. So one, that token usage goes way, way, way down. Second, because we are giving the language model better and more relevant context without the noise, and I'll insert here that we created this document index product after another company that created a product called Page Index. And Page Index was used for financial documents mainly. And what they found for Page Index was a language model's kind of baseline performance for accuracy is about 50%. But once they run it through Page Index and they look through this kind of like thinking system that goes through the table of content, the accuracy jumped up on the same language model from 50% to 98.7%. And
that's incredible.
It is amazing, isn't it? So our expectation is for a Syntheia doc index system to run through a document first before giving a language model the data. We're going to look at a similar sort of uplift where state of the art for words and legal work is around 85%. We want to get it up to 97%, 98%. And that's a difference between getting 1 in 6 things wrong to getting 1 in 30 things wrong. You can't really use it. It's Russian roulette. To actually 1 in 30 wrong is pretty damn good.
Yeah, fascinating. Really interested by the positioning you're in because you're offering a better output for the user, you're offering more efficiency for the user, and you're not in the UI UX layer. You may have easier connectivity with certain tools than others, but putting that aside, in the end, if you can achieve connectivity, you don't particularly care if a user is using Claude or they're using Copilot or they're using Legora, right? It's a very unique position as a LegalTech vendor or as someone offering an AI solution in this space to be able to check all those boxes.
Oh, well, that's what we're hoping for, but the landscape moves so quickly, right? So I'm speaking against myself here by saying I have no idea what's going to happen next week. And so we're constantly watching and going, what's actually the gap in the market that's going to move the needle and help lawyers, help end consumers? That's what we are always looking for.
It's a frequent feedback that I hear from legal users, both in-house and at law firms, that they are frustrated and underwhelmed by the output of some of the tools that they deploy at that UI UX layer. And they have an understanding that some of that has to do with how the data has been input, how the data has been kept, with the fact that the data is just, garbage in and then they get garbage out. And they're aware of that, but they don't seem to feel like anyone's offering a solution to that problem. And my quick observation is often the UI UX layer vendors aren't particularly interested in fixing that problem. And that's not a criticism. That's just an observation. It might not be their business model to do that. So it's really interesting to see someone jump in and try to solve that problem.
Thank you. Well, I respect the Hagoras of the world and what they're offering and the sort of like focus they have in making sure their product speaks to lawyers. We just think that while they can focus on the user experience side, we want to make sure everyone benefits from having better data, because ultimately it's garbage in, garbage out. That has not changed.
Yeah, really exciting. Horace, thank you so much for coming on and explaining the product to me and spitballing another chaotic week in legal tech.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy, and I look forward to chatting again very soon.
Yeah, absolutely.